Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. We do so by painting an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those individuals are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality and the reintegration process. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello. And welcome to episode 90 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Time to retrieve your listening passports, if you will, friends. We are going back over to Europe today, spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of thought. Reminds me of the classic opening from ABC's Wide World of Sports. If any of you American listeners in particular recall that classic opening from their show, spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport. There's your YouTube homework if you're unfamiliar with that vintage opening. Today we are joined by Piet Broenland, connecting with us all the way from the Netherlands. Piet Broenland is a certified healthcare professional, aid provider with specialization in addiction and addictive behavior. After many years battling with his addiction, he stopped using mind and mood-altering chemicals in 2008 after he was introduced to a self-help program actually based on the Minnesota model. He started his recovery at that point and has been clean ever since. Piet found a new way of life by adopting the tools of treatment and following this self-help program on a daily basis, and he is now a successful member of society, a happy and a free man. Piet pursued professional development by participating in collegiate level studies, training programs. He's been working for more than 10 years with a lot of dedication, as you're about to hear, as a healthcare professional, addiction counselor. He's worked with various clients, including people with mental health issues, addicts, the autistic and deaf clients, psychiatric patients, and with general addicts in recovery. He has now bundled his experience and knowledge into a company known as Ikigai Counseling. We're going to talk all about Ikigai Counseling and so much more. I'm thrilled to be bringing Piet Broenland from you today, all the way from Amsterdam. Enjoy this great conversation, folks, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Piet. Why don't we kick it off? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Generally speaking, tell us about the journey you've been on that's brought you to this place in your life right now.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, and thank you for having me on the podcast of The Criminologist. Like you said, my name is Piet Broenland. I'm 47 years old. I live in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands. And it's been a hell of a journey, my life so far. I grew up in this little town called Soest with my family. My dad left me and my mom when I was one, and you know, I was very confused as a child. And when I went to high school, I started doing drugs at an early age, and that really took over my life. It made my life completely unmanageable, and I was powerless over my addiction and the drug of choice that I used at that time. And my life brought me also into prison sentences, different kinds in the Netherlands, and several of them. I spent a couple of years in prison, and 13 years ago, I came into recovery and I started to have my own company as well. And it's called Ikigai Counseling. And the main objective of Ikigai Counseling is to help people into recovery from all kinds of mental health issues, addiction, life, how do you say that? Life-changing events in the past. So, in short, that's the past.
Yeah, well, let's dive into the present and the future. As you noted, you specialize in addiction and addiction therapy. Why don't we start out, just share your process with us, and then talk about how you incorporate your experience into your current counseling approach, maybe.
Yeah, well, I started doing drugs when I was 13, and I did that for almost 20 years. At 17, I got introduced to my drug of choice, crack cocaine, and that really completely changed my life. And I needed so much of that particular drug that I needed to do small crimes and also big crimes actually in the past. And that, like I said, that brought me into the Dutch prison system. I spent there a couple of years, and at a certain moment, I just could not go on like that. I was done. I was completely rock bottom. The door closed again behind me. I could not get out, and my life was a mess. I lost everything because of my addiction. Former relationship, houses, jobs, everything was gone because of the unmanageability of my addiction, actually. And at a certain point, I hit rock bottom, and I asked for help. And there were two people in my life at that time that offered that help. And I took it with both hands because I had no choice anymore. It was either dying from my addiction or trying to get into recovery and stop using. And luckily for me, I was successful.
We talk a lot about desistance on this program, and there's a school of thought out there that individuals such as yourself almost use those past experience and sort of leverage that into their resiliency and use it almost as a springboard to go on and do bigger and better things because of it rather than in spite of it, which sounds like is exactly what you did, Piet. Let's talk about your company, Ikigai Counseling. First off, I love the name. Share with our listeners the Japanese definition of that, or the definition of that Japanese word, rather, Ikigai, if you would.
Yeah, thank you. It's a concept, a philosophy, a way of life. And it contains 4 elements. The first element is that what you think that the world needs. The second element is that you can make money with it. The third element is that you think that the world needs this kind of attention on the subject. And the fourth element is that when you wake up, you are very eager to do something with this specific thing that you like. And the center of that is the center of my passion. And my passion is recovery in any kind of form. So the Japanese try to apply this in daily life, because if you do something that makes you happy, you are more eager to continue doing it, and you are enjoying it. And in fact, some people who are living by this philosophy get older than regular people because they are doing what they're like. They are happy with what they're doing, because a lot of people are in regular jobs, unhappy, and just continuing because they're afraid of losing money or whatever. And this is really something that the center of your passion, that's something that makes you happy. So you should do something with that in daily life. And for me, that's recovery.
I love it, Piet. It reminds me of an expression that I heard years ago, and I applied to my undergraduate criminal justice students all the time. And that is, find a job you love and you'll never work another day the rest of your life. But it speaks to what you said about the passion. Yeah. So what sets Ikigai apart from some of the other more familiar traditional approaches to addiction recovery that folks might be familiar with?
Yeah, well, I'm an experienced expert, so I have gone through several of these topics that addiction contains, whether it's unmanageability, powerlessness, prison, homelessness, mental health issues. All these things I have gone through in the past. So I know when someone is sitting across of me and he talks about these experiences, I can relate. And if I can relate, and I tell those clients or someone that I relate, sometimes it makes it more easy for the person across me that he or she opens up more, because they find connection, they find recognition, and then they say, "Oh, you've been through that. Oh, yeah, and this and that." So it offers a different level of connection. And I have experienced some regular counseling or parole officers that did not know what they were talking about. And it was very hard for me as a person to connect with that person or to listen to the suggestions that they gave me. It was very difficult for me to adopt those suggestions. When I met someone in prison that had the same experiences, I opened up. I could relate, I could connect. I could share honestly what I was going through because that person across me knew what I was going through because he or she had the same experiences. So that's a difference, a big difference.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to leave a link for your website, ikigaicounseling.com, in the description of this podcast episode so folks can check that out. But when I was poking around, I noticed that your methods include motivational interviewing, reality therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and relapse prevention. What was behind, and maybe speak to this, what I see at least as a multi-pronged approach to your counseling mindset?
Yeah, well, from experience and from sources that I found is that CBT is one of the most effective approaches to deal with addiction. It's about changing the way you think and if you can change the way you think and you don't have to feel certain feelings anymore and you don't have to act out on them as well. If you can make some space between the thought, the feeling, and the behavior, you have room for choices. And that's a big difference. Out of experience in the past, when I was using, I had no choice. I had to use. And with CBT, you can open up a bit. You can make some room between the thought, the feeling, and the behavioral thing. That's one of it. And relapse prevention is, for me, a tool that I also apply myself in my recovery in order to not relapse. And I think it's very helpful tool to recognize certain situations, places, people, things that trigger you in any kind of way, whether it's triggering you into addiction or triggering you into anger, and triggering into trauma, triggering you to any kind of feeling that can lead to using again. The reality therapy is, for me, also very important because I like to be in reality because my mind can take me anywhere. And if I'm not in reality, if I not see how the world is working and how it's affecting my life as a person, I find it very difficult to make the healthy choices. So I need to be in reality. I need to see what's going on. I need to adjust myself to the world, and I need to make healthy choices for myself. The motivational interviewing is also a tool that's very handy because if I have a one-on-one counseling with a client and that person says to me, yeah, I don't have a lot of money and I would like to buy new jeans because this jeans is like 3 years old, but I'm spending all my money on crack cocaine, alcohol, or whatever, there's the slight opening. So you're using a lot of drugs. Okay, cool. So your money goes to that particular drug. So you don't have any more money for that jeans that you want to buy. Can you see what's going on here? And that person slowly tries to understand how he or she wants to change. It's about what people are saying. You can go into that. You can say, okay, well, you're saying this, but this is the reality. This is what's going on. So how are we going to deal with this situation? I've learned all these things when I came into recovery 13 years ago. I applied for a job at a safe house where I lived when I came out of prison, and they told me how the 12 core functions of addiction counseling. And with that was the first start of my company. And later on, I had some certificates in CBT and reality therapy and the relapse prevention. And I think those tools are very helpful in understanding that clients need to have to find recovery or find a different way to live.
I see a lot of these tools employed by probation and parole officers. We see them a lot in our sort of evidence-based approaches that we take with justice-involved individuals. I'm curious, Piet, I assume you're serving justice-involved clients, but do you see maybe if, for example, a former probation officer was using motivational interviewing or using CBT, which I'm also a huge fan of, and you did a great job of talking about the importance of that thought behavior link. But when you get those clients who, again, maybe didn't, they weren't in a good spot when their PO or previous practitioner was using these tools, are you at least saying, well, even if it didn't sink in, you were sort of laying the groundwork with the CBT or these other tools, so that, again, maybe when they get to you and they're in a different spot in their journey, that at least, again, the fact that they're familiar with these approaches, maybe it resonates more, or am I overthinking that?
Well, you never know when someone is ready to change. So it's very difficult to, as a healthcare professional in any kind of job, whether it's with parole or prison or in regular healthcare, it's very difficult to say, okay, today is the day you're going to change. It doesn't work like that. I can have all these suggestions. I can have all these big ideas. I can have all these great, like I said, suggestions. But if the person is not willing or not ready to change, then nothing will really happen. Maybe slightly different changes, but not the big one. So the thing is, what I always tell in my presentations, whether it's in prison or in schools or in companies or in healthcare organizations, is that every time that person is across you, do the same thing. Treat them the same. Be level with them. And if they're not ready, next time, do it again. Because you never know when someone is ready. You never know when someone has hit rock bottom. And you never know when someone is opening up. I had the same experiences. People were trying to help me in so many ways. I've been in so many different projects, clinics, different girlfriends, whatsoever. And at a certain moment, I was done. And that's the moment you can pick up someone. Because it's not up to me to tell someone how to live their life. It's not up to me to say what you're doing is wrong. I can only share my experiences. I can only tell them this might help. It's up to you if you take that suggestion. Next time, if you don't take suggestion, we're good. It's not up to me. So you never know when someone is ready. So you need to have the same approach over and over. Might be tiring. Might be if you have expectations, it might result to disappointment. So don't have expectations. Just be open, level, be present, and try to be human. That's my approach.
Yeah, I absolutely love that approach. I absolutely love it. One of the things that I love about hosting this podcast is I get to talk to thought leaders such as yourself and others around the world. And I just find that I'm personally growing and evolving and learning what we can do better. From your lens, from that addiction lens, just broadly speaking, what works in the current approaches that we're taking to addiction and addictive behaviors? And then maybe conversely, Piet, what doesn't work? Or I shouldn't say what doesn't work, but what should we evolve from? What have we learned and we can evolve from?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's addiction. It's a very difficult topic. There's still debate going on whether it's a disease or not. Some people it is, some people don't. And actually, for like healthcare professionals or insurance companies, it's important to define it as a disease. Because of that, they can label it in some kind of different whatever, and they can pay for it in some kind of way. But I don't care if it's a disease or not. I think it is personally, but if the person across me in a counseling session says, no, it's not a disease, then cool, whatever you think it is. There's no specific gene that says you're an addict. There are social parts that is important. That it's your family background that's important. It's the way your brain works. It's important. So it's different kind of elements that make you or make you not an addict or sensitive to addiction. And because of that, the approach is so different. The thing is, what I find important, why is someone using? The reason why, because if you know why is someone is using, whether it's trauma, because a lot of addicts have trauma, you should focus on that. Because if you take the pain away, there might be less reason for someone to use some kind of substance to stop the pain. So if you find the cause of why someone is using, you have a greater chance to stop using or to help someone into recovery. So it should not be about the disease, or it should not be about clinic. Yeah, of course, clinics are good for helping people to detox, to find some kind of recovery, but the pain should go. You should address the pain. Why is someone using? The reason why is very important, I believe. So if you focus on trauma, or because I'm Circle of Trauma. Do you know Fritzi Horstman and this whole kind of?
Yes, I'm familiar with Fritzi's work. Yes.
Yeah, and she does it in prison, the trauma circle, and she focuses on what happened in your childhood, because the childhood is very important for how you live your life when you're an adult, because you see your family, the role models, you have all kinds of experiences, your brain is developing. And so this childhood experiences, the advanced childhood experiences, the traumas are very important. If someone is being abused or sexually abused or hit every day, or poverty or whatever, it's important to address those traumas. And I think in the trauma section, there's a lot of reason why people are using.
Yeah, we're learning so much more about the role of trauma, not just in addiction, but criminality, and it's so worth researching. As you were speaking, another question literally just popped into my head. One of the things that I'm a big believer of is that in the criminal justice system, historically at least, we take a very, what I refer to as a binary approach to the way we do business. It's very pass fail. So any setback is viewed as a failure. As opposed to what is referred to as more of a harm reduction model, which of course we have in the world of addiction as well. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe talk about, for the listeners who don't know what I'm referring to when I say the harm reduction model, versus again, this sort of you're sober or you're not, as opposed to, again, more of a harm reduction approach.
Yeah. Two things that I would like to say about that. First of all, harm reduction is a very good tool for people, how do I say this? The unmanageability of addiction and the powerlessness. If people don't have a house, or they don't have a shower, or they cannot eat because all their thinking and their behavior is all about addiction, we need to try to help these people, because it's not up to us to decide for them to stop using. It's their own choice. And if society keeps blaming them for everything and keeps shutting them out, and that cannot be my neighbor, or that should not be the person that I meet in the supermarket when I do my groceries or whatever. If we put these people out of the society, they will use more, and they were less able to ask for help, because the stigma on addiction is very, very big. That's one part. So in the Netherlands, luckily, we have a very good harm reduction approach of addiction. We have spaces where people can use. We have houses that we provide housing and showers and meals and everything like that. So those people don't have to live on the street. They don't have to die because of the cold or whatever. There is some kind of humanity in a way going on. And even though those people are using drugs and sometimes doing crimes, and they belong to us. They belong to society, and we should meet them as a person, not as a drug addict or a junkie or whatever. It's a person with a substance abuse disorder, like someone else has a mentally disorder or schizophrenia or whatever, So they're human. Everyone is a human, so we need to approach them as a human and need to support them in any kind of way. That's one. On the other hand, there's a movement going on in the Netherlands, in prison especially, that when someone in prison, we have two levels in prison, red and green. If you're in green, you are able to work on your own rehabilitation. when you're in prison, you can order a ID card, you can apply for a house, you can apply for an income, and all those things that can help you when you get out to not come back into prison again. But if you cross the rules one time, only one time, in any kind of way, when you're aggressive, when you get into a fight, or when you're doing drugs in the Netherlands, you go from green level to red level. And in red level, you cannot do anything. You are there until the end of your sentence. You have no right to apply for any kind of things you need when you get out. And that kind of rule is working against the whole system. Because the Dutch government thinks that everybody has his own responsibility. But some people cannot hold that responsibility because of mentally challenged issues or because of addiction. When I was in prison, I could not stop using because I lost everything. I was in pain. I was in agony. I was angry. I was this. So when someone came along with marijuana, for instance, I smoked it because I want to forget where I was. I want to forget that I was in prison. And I was mentally fit. If you have someone with mentally challenged, how do you say that, mentally challenged? Is that the correct expression? Thank you. If you have someone with mentally challenged issues, they cannot oversee the outcome. So they think short term. So yeah, tonight I want to smoke a joint in the Dutch prison. I see what tomorrow happens. I don't care. That's the mentality at that moment. Because you're there, you're putting in prison, the door's closed, you cannot go anywhere. I understand why people are using inside prison. But that means if they caught you, you cannot work on your own rehabilitation. And that's like contra. That's not harm reduction. That's not helping people. That's putting them down again. So I'm very angry about this new rule in prison. And but that's a different non-working approach of addiction.
You mentioned prisons. Perfect segue to my next question. Many of our listeners work in the field of corrections, probation, parole. What piece of advice would you give to those practitioners who are supervising individuals who are struggling with addiction?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like I said before, everybody is human. So have a human approach. Level with that person. Don't how do you say it?
Yeah. I think what you're referencing is what I refer to as the power differential, that the probation officer is on one level and the client is at a different level. And in reality, they're two human beings on the same level. But yeah, don't exploit that power differential.
No, yeah. Well, of course, there's a difference. Whether it's a teacher, a parent, a cop, or a parole officer, there is a certain level of difference, But in the beginning, we're all human, and if you approach a human with humanity, what you probably will get back is also a human approach. If I see you for the first time and say, okay, I'm this and I'm that, and I'm gonna tell you this, and we're gonna do it like that, people will get, okay, what's going on? There's no connection. There's no level. There's no communication. It's like from top to bottom, and it doesn't really work with addicts or prisoners or people who are in pain. So you need to level. You need to make someone feel safe, comfortable, but also be honest. Tell them what consequences may be for certain behavior, and if that's what it is, you need to tell them as well, and provide them with all the information that they need or might need, and refer to 12-step programs or to trauma circle things, or everything that someone can really help. And also, what I try to do is also talk about my own experiences. That might be very difficult for regular healthcare professionals, but it makes it more, well, I can say it again, more human. If I share from my own experiences, like, well, yesterday I had a fight with my girlfriend and I was a bit angry or whatsoever, that person across me says, oh, okay, yeah, I've also had fights with my girlfriend. So in that way you can connect. And like I also said before, is that you never know when someone is really ready. So try to have the same approach over and over and over and over and over again. Because you will be you can be surprised at what moment someone turns around, and you will be surprised and when someone asks for help. So stay away from judgmental issues, stay away from stigma, stay away from whatever. Just approach the person as a human being, let them be, help them in any kind of way they are asking for, show them what's going on, and share with them also your personal experiences.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about trauma during this interview. And as you were speaking, one of the things that resonated with me, and this comes out of the trauma literature, is just the importance of creating that safe space.
True.
And it also feeds into, we've talked about motivational interviewing, but I always tell folks, motivational interviewing is an awesome tool. But at the end of the day, it's really all about augmenting that working alliance, which again, it's about that safe place, which is what you've been saying, Piet. That's that connection piece is really the key.
It is.
A lot of times, and maybe it's just because of a lack of knowledge, there's a lot of bias and prejudice on the part of the public about individuals who struggle with addiction. What's one thing the public really gets wrong about people who struggle with addiction? Or is there, like I said, is there a bias or a prejudice out there that you would just love to address and correct the public on?
Yeah, well,
or don't we have enough time on the show?
I can go on and on and on about this topic of bias. There's a lot of stigma on addiction because people think it's a choice. And when I'm in because there's a difference. The first time I take something, alcohol, cigarette, whatever, that's a choice. But if I'm addicted to it, at a certain point, the choice is gone. Addiction takes over. It changes my brain paths in the brains. It changes my behavior. It changes the way I feel about myself. It changes the way I see the world. So when people still have the idea that addiction is a choice, they will say, okay, just stop using. Say no to drugs. Well, if that were the case, if that was the only way to deal with addiction, I would stop 25 years ago. I wouldn't have spent 10 years in prison. I wouldn't have had the loss of many girlfriends, jobs, money, cars, everything. If it was that simple, a lot of people will stop using after they had the first bad experiences on any kind of substance. But that's not the fact. In Amsterdam last week, there was a official bus driver of the city of Amsterdam, who crashed his bus into a car because he was on ecstasy and GHB. And this was just a regular bus driver. Nobody expected this to happen. Or whether it's a movie star that fucks up, and people saying, why? What's going on? You have a lot of money, you have fame, you have this, and people are still using. Whether it's rock stars. How many rock stars have died from addiction? They had money, they had fame, they had everything that they heart desired. But they kept on using because of a reason. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It can take anybody, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, So we need to see it as a disease or as a mental health issue. Because in that way, we can find ways to help those people better. Whether they want to stop or not, whether they want to have a functional using life or whatever, we need to help them. We need to take it out of the stigma in order for people also to ask for help. Because the internal stigma, because I was in prison and the guard said, oh my God, Piet, you're back again. After a month, could you not stay outside for 1 month? What's wrong with you? Don't you have a backbone? Don't you have a character? What's wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with me. I have the disease of addiction. I found recovery, luckily, and I don't have to use again, and I don't have to be in prison again because I stopped using. But I had to acknowledge the fact that I have an addiction of the disease of addiction, and I cannot use. I needed to stop fighting. I needed to surrender in order to have a life, to be happy.
So I know listeners are going to be curious because you've noted you're from the Netherlands, you're in Amsterdam. Here in the United States, we're going through a process over the years of more and more states are legalizing marijuana. And again, I know you're in Amsterdam, and I get this question from probation officers all the time. We use risk assessment, and we look at substance misuse as a risk. But again, when the landscape is changing between what's legal and again what's really driving someone's delinquent behavior, I think maybe because probation officers, at least here in the United States, tend to be very concrete thinkers, they struggle with that difference between, well, it's legal, but it's harming this person. I guess what I'm trying to say is, what's your experience been like, or what's the experience of professionals in Amsterdam been like with that phenomenon of the more liberal legalization, yet you're still trying to address this issue? Does that make sense?
It does. Well, yeah, Amsterdam, it's we got coffee shops at almost every corner. And that is what it is. We the city government of Amsterdam is trying to ban these coffee shops out of the regular street views and near schools and things like that. So, but the thing is, with medical marijuana, that's a different story, because my previous job, we did research on medical marijuana for psychiatric patients, because these people were hearing voices, and when they smoked some marijuana, the voices were gone, and they could live a somewhat healthy life without the voices that are telling these people negative things like, you need to kill yourself, or you need to do this, or you need to do that, or you're a loser. So for those people, I think medical marijuana can be a solution, but it needs to be provided by a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because if that's not the case, and there needs to be more research on this, because like I said, we did this research on my previous job, but I think in America, you developed the whole medical marijuana system much more than we did in the Netherlands. We kept only selling regular weed to regular people. But I think, like you said, in several states in the U.S., medical marijuana is provided. I don't know the specific rules or the conditions that you can apply for it. But I think when you have mental health issues, when you hear voices, or you're schizophrenic, or you're paranoid, and it helps you to have a clear or less fucked up, if I may say the word, mind, and the reason why you're using the medical marijuana is because the mind is quiet and you can continue doing the things that you like to do, then it might be a very very good solution for those people. It's kind of like a harm reduction tool for those people.
Yeah. One of my goals is to secure a guest from Portugal, and I assume you're aware of this, Piet, but Portugal went all in on your previously referenced philosophy of treating substance misuse as a public health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. And they took all of their criminal justice funding and their prison funding, and they poured it into addiction and mental health funding, and they're treating that population again as patients rather than as prisoners. So, like I said, I want to track down a guest from Portugal to check in on their experiment, if you will, and I'll let you know when I do that, so we can both follow up on this conversation. Hey, what's on the horizon for Piet Broenland? If I have you back in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, look into your crystal ball, Piet. What do you think we might be talking about in the future?
Yeah, I have so many ideas, Joseph. It's killing me. Yeah, I have a regular job, 32 hours, and I work in psychiatry as a counselor, a mentor for people who are in the Housing First project. So they get a house, and then we continue working on their issues, problems. So I come to the people's houses here in Amsterdam. Very nice. I like it. And that's a regular job, 32 hours in a week. Besides that, I have Ikigai Counseling, my job. And next month, I will have a conversation in one of the biggest prisons in the Netherlands to be there 1 day a week as an experienced expert on addiction, stigma, detention, mental health. and I will provide the people working there with trainings, with presentations on addiction, mental health. How does it work? How does it work in the brain? How do you hold a conversation with someone under the influence of some kind of substance? How have you have like this human approach that I'm very fond of? And of course, on that same day that I will be working there, I will talk to inmates that have the same experiences as I do, because previously I shared that there were two people that were very important to me in the beginning of my recovery. And one person came into prison 15 years ago and told me his story. And that was one of the reasons that I decided that I want to go out, that I want to change my life. And I like to have the same experience. I would like to share my experience, strength, and hope with all these inmates in order to let them see that there is a possibility to get out of it if you want to. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I am also having a week, the first week of February. I'm going into a high school. I'm gonna do a presentation to 1,500 students in several classes on the topic also of addiction, stigma, marijuana. How you're gonna have the discussion with your parents if they find out you're using drugs, and also I have a meeting with the police academy in Amsterdam, also to tell them my experiences and try to destigmatize addiction as well. And the last thing that is on the agenda is that I found an investor, and she is willing to invest in a rehab facility in Thailand, because I have been in Thailand several years. And I've been working there in a rehab facility as well. And this person and I would like to open up a rehab in the south of Thailand.
That is amazing, Piet. I'm definitely having you back on the show now because I want to get updates on all this great things you're doing. Yeah. Piet, you're an inspiration. I just love how, again, you're taking your past experiences and using that to give back to others and for the betterment of society. I think it's just admirable, Piet. Piet Broenland from Ikigai Counseling. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you very soon, Piet.
Thank you, Joseph, for having me.
Thank you, Piet, for sharing your thoughts, experiences, perspective. That is how we are going to learn and grow, my friends, by hearing more and more of those things. As I noted in the episode opening today, spanning the globe to bring you constant variety of thoughts, experience, perspectives. To that end, I am excited to share with you all a new project that the Criminologist podcast is taking on. We want to hear from you, the listener, as to what it is like to view corrections, addiction, criminology through your individual lens. Now, if you are a probation officer, think of this as sort of a day in the life of a probation officer. We are asking that you please share your probation stories with us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And check in to the show by leaving us a voicemail at 612-552-2566. Or you can simply send us a voice memo to a special Gmail we've set up. That address is probationcheckin@gmail.com. That's probationcheckin@gmail.com. If you are a justice-involved individual or have desisted from crime, we want to hear your experiences as well. What was supervision like? What was your desistance process like? What was your change process like? Again, something that may not get captured in the dry research data that we look at. Again, a day in the life, if you will. We will be collecting anonymous phone calls from probation clients, probation officers all over the world. We really feel that communication is oftentimes at the root of making advancements. And as you all hear every week in the opening of this program, we like to paint an accurate portrait of the journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. We want to stay away from those media-driven caricatures and really, again, get at your perspective, a day in the life from your experiences. Again, you can leave us a voicemail at 612-552-2566 or send a voice memo to probationcheckin@gmail.com. Audio recording should not include any specific names or locations. Those will be edited out if left in error and may potentially be used within a future podcast in our segment, A Day in the Life. Again, I will leave a link in the show description of this episode for you with that Gmail and phone number. Hey, we'll be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices or implementation, program design, and obviously the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email of thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages of The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out, friends. We are also on Twitter. The Criminologist Media Group is on Twitter at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this program. Hey, merchandise is available if you're looking to score a criminologist pen, refrigerator magnet, coffee mug. Reach out to the show. And if you believe in what we're doing on the program, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to this podcast. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.